So, hello everyone, my name is Gerard Cortese. So I had a pretty long presentation for you, but we're going to cut it short due to dinner and everything, so I'm going to fly through this as best I can to give you all a background of what to expect tomorrow. So my goal for this presentation, where, just to warn you, there's a lot of maps with cute little icons on them. So just to give you an idea of what to expect for tomorrow, and to give you an idea of what you're looking at when you're out in the field. But some of this, unfortunately, I will have to cut short so we can get to dinner and things like that. But what I want to focus on today is the 22nd Regiment and 8th Regiment and some of their operations in the Hurtgen Forest, but more importantly, the Medal of Honor recipients of those regiments. So you had a total of 4 Medal of Honors in the 4th Division. One of them being Pedro Cano, but then you had one in the 22nd Infantry Regiment, Macario Garcia, who was in B Company of the 22nd Infantry Regiment, Lieutenant Bernard Ray of F Company in the 8th Regiment, and at the time Major George Mabry, who was the 2nd Battalion Commander, or became the 2nd Battalion Commander due to reasons that we'll discuss in a moment. So this was part of the agenda, talking about some of the operations, but we already touched a little bit on the November offensive and Operation Queen, but I'll speak through some of that stuff and some of the objectives. So the reason why we're in the Hurtgen Forest is basically coming out of the Normandy campaign, right? We have the Falaise Pocket. They ended up bagging about 250,000 German troops from the 7th Army, and whatever German troops were left were basically running back to the German border and basically doing delaying actions. And this is what many GIs refer to as the rat races. The British, I guess, referred to it as the Great Swan, because they moved so quickly after the Germans, and by the time they hit the border in September, they've outrun their supply lines and they've had to slow down. So it's taken them a minute to get into the Siegfried Line or West Wall. But they're going to get in there and they're going to get into the Hurtgen Forest. And these are some of the area for the Hurtgen Forest and the objectives. The overall objective is to get to better terrain through the Hurtgen Forest to the Cologne Plain and eventually to the Ruhr to destroy Germany's war-making capabilities in order to destroy the German army in the war. But in order to do that, they need to get through the Rhine River and they need to get to the Ruhr River near Düren. So the 4th Infantry Division during November offensive, during Operation Queen, their objective is to reach the south of Düren and create bridgeheads across the Ruhr River. If they're successful in doing that, then their orders are to push on to Cologne. But unfortunately, they're not going to get that far because they're in forest. So this is shows you where everyone is in November for the November offensive known as Operation Queen. And basically, in a nutshell, the reason why they came up with this is because previous divisions like the 9th, the 28th Division, 3rd Armored Division struggled going in on their own, and the Germans were able to focus on these divisions and to stop them. So Eisenhower and his senior leaders all decided in a conference, well, we have 2 choices. One, we can keep what we got, hold what we got, stop where we are, build up, get supplies, get manpower up, and wait till for a spring offensive. And then his other thought was, well, we have other considerations. We have political considerations. The Russians are still going to be on offensive, so we can't stop because of them. If we stop, then the Germans are going to rebuild, and we got to keep them on their heels. And really, for American culture, it's the idea of keeping the initiative. So they want to keep that initiative, and they're going to do it on a bigger scale with tactical air support. And this brings about the idea of the November offensive. So just to talk briefly about the 4th Infantry Division, this is the makeup of it. You have the 8th, 12th, and 22nd Infantry Regiments, and basically it's what's known as a triangular division system. Everything's in threes, and it's about mobility. So when they came up with this was in 1940, everyone was freaking out because Germany was steamrolling Europe, and they needed to be mobile like the Germans were in case they needed to fight them. So they came up with this triangular division system. And just to have an understanding of how units fought in the Hurtgen Forest, you have what they call a regimental combat team. So basically, you're going to take one of the infantry regiments, and you're going to have your rifle battalions within those regiments, 3 of them. And aside from that, you're going to take a lot of these attachments the tank battalions, the tank destroyer battalions, your engineers, and you're going to take a company from each of them and attach them to a regiment, and now you got yourself like a mini army. And that's basically how they're operating when they're in the Hurtgen Forest. And of course, as we mentioned, Tubby Barton, the commander of the 4th Division, I always like to say, when Hollywood decides to make their movie about 4th Infantry Division, they need to get Tom Selleck to come play it. So this is the 275th Infantry Division, and this is the main opponent to the 4th Infantry Division. These guys have been fighting through France and Normandy, and they were chewed up pretty bad in Normandy and pulled back and refitted, and fought throughout the Hurtgen Forest throughout September and October against the 9th Division, 28th Division, and so on. And here they are, they're still there, and this just gives you a makeup of what they are. And just talking about the Germans, I mean, we can go down the rabbit hole on this one, because it's just a hodgepodge of units that are just hurting for manpower, and they're just totally getting depleted, and they're doing everything they can. And basically, when a unit comes in and replaces a unit, that unit isn't really getting replaced, they're just changing over the command structure and basically keeping those troops in. So when you think about it, it makes sense why these guys just went over the other side and decided to surrender. They're just done. They're all burnt out. And this gives you an idea of all those units that supported the 275th. So they were basically in the line until about 21 November, and then they were replaced by the 344th, which was a unit combined with the 91st Division from Normandy. So those two divisions and created the 344th Volksgrenadier, and they become the next division, and then the 353rd, and so on. And they just keep recycling the same troops over and over. And just to give you an idea of what it was like for 4th Division going into the forest, all right? People think about, when they talk about replacements, a lot of these guys were newbies. Not going into the forest for the 4th Division. By the time you're going into the forest on November 16th for the Operation Queen, the guys that are coming back from hospital in September and October are guys that are coming back that were wounded in Normandy. So this division at the time, the morale is high, and a lot of these guys have a lot of combat experience already. So the division is really in a good spot when they enter the forest. The problem is when they, at the end, is by the end of November, these guys are wounded for a second time or killed in action, and the replacements they're getting at that time are the newbies, and it's basically ruining their combat power. And then you can see the difference in relation to the Germans, what their numbers look like. And this is just to give you an idea. So tomorrow when we go through an idea of what the German defenses were like, they were all about defense and depth. They did the same thing in Normandy. So in the 8th area, you have 3 main lines of defense that they have to deal with. And these deal with trenches as well. So you can see the red lines are all trench works. So the reason why it was so built up like this in this area was because of the L25, the Schevenhütte-Düren Road. This was a direct access to Düren, and the units from the 275th in this area, that was their main objective, was to stop any passage or the 4th Division gaining Düren. When you look in the 22nd area, it's a little bit more improvised and makeshift. So you're just looking at wood-covered bunkers. So, you know, you're looking at a foxhole that's covered by wood, dirt, and mud. And this is why they're so successful in surviving artillery from the Americans, and why they made it so difficult for the 4th Division and other divisions coming through the forest. So when you're talking about forest fighting, it's really a defender's paradise. And it makes it easier for them when you have 30, 40, maybe 80 guys holding off an entire rifle battalion of about 600, or yeah, about 500-600 guys. So these are just examples of what the German trenches look like. And we're going to see some of these tomorrow. And this is an actual trench that we will see. I refer to this as the Mabry Trench, because down here is the area, part of Hill 101, that stopped Mabry when he made his attack. And it was the day for the actions he did that got him the Medal of Honor. But you can see the zigzag trenches, which was really popular for these types of trenches. And then out in front, you can see the foxholes and machine gun positions coming out of that. So the idea of the trenches was basically for communications and for movement between these positions. And a lot of those positions are probably going to be log covered. And this is just another example of it. And in front of this, you're going to have wire entanglements as well as minefields in front of that. And all that area out front is going to be zeroed in by mortar and artillery. So this is just an example of what the trenches look like. And this is the actual trench we will go to, which I refer to as the Mabry Trench. You can see Mayor Ann in the background. I don't know what she's doing there. She's probably yelling at Albert or something. I don't know. But we will see this trench tomorrow. You'll also see this all over the forest. These are German machine gun positions, the U-shape, which is synonymous to these positions. And you can see what it would have looked like back in that time. So when you see these, you'll know that's a German machine gun position. This is actually in the 4th Division area. You won't be in that area because it's in a really remote spot. But it's down by the base of Hill 292 where K Company, it was an objective that K Company from the 8th took. All right, so the 22nd Infantry Regiment. This is their commander, Colonel Buck Lanham, and his good friend, Ernest Hemingway, who many of us know all about. And one of the reasons why their friendship was so big was Lanham was actually a writer himself. He actually wrote a lot of poetry. And the two guys got together real well because of that. He was reporting for the 4th, for writing for the magazine Collier, and Lanham came to the regiment in July. He was a regimental commander in the 69th back in the States. Came over to Europe in July and during the Normandy campaign and took over the regiment. And his belief was to save lives and end the war quickly was to attack, attack, and attack. And you'll see why when I talk about some of his tactics there. So these are some of the objectives for the 22nd. And it's the same thing with the 8th. All of these initial objectives have in common are high ground and road junctions. They all have that in common. And mainly because they just need to get access to these areas to get through the forest. So the objectives of both of these regiments is to clear the forest and support the 1st Division to the north. Now this area here, this reservoir, this is a modern reservoir. This was not there during the time of the battle. But we'll talk more about that draw because that also involves Mabry as well. But the roads, the lettering of the roads were ways that the division identified the major road networks through the forest. And what they did, it was lettered from U, from the north to the south to Z. So when I start talking about road U, road Y, this and that, that's what we're referring to. So 16 November, Operation Queen kicks off. 4,500 bombers of all types, British and American Air Forces come through. But they don't bomb the front, basically because of the mistakes that were made in Normandy during the Cobra attack. They pushed it even further back to avoid that mistake. And basically what they were focusing on were mainly the rear areas. So the area where we are now enduring really got bombed heavily. They wanted to bomb the supplies, the troop movements, and all the reserve units that were in the back. The stuff for the front was meant for the artillery and the 81mm mortars that supported that as well. So when they kicked off, they were down at the bottom left of the screen here, across the river, the stream there, the Roderweg, and they jumped across that river. In front of them were elements of the 18th Luftwaffe Fortress Battalion. And they had outposts out by that river, and those outposts were the ones that alerted the rest of the guys to the rear, and they had observers up there, and they started dropping artillery on the battalions coming through for the 22nd. So when you look at the battalions, red, 1st Battalion, white, 2nd Battalion, blue, 3rd Battalion, you get it, red, white, and blue. There's always the thing for the designation there. So the 17th is an interesting day. They're pretty successful on the 16th. They break through initially. The 2nd Battalion right there on the white, they get onto Hill 201. And the 1st Battalion goes to kick off. And this just talks about the casualty rates being so high among officers and stuff in the 22nd. And right before they kick off, the Germans hit him with an artillery barrage. And the 1st Battalion commander, Lieutenant Colonel Drake, is wounded. And right after him, the 3rd Battalion commander is also wounded, Lieutenant Colonel T. And he was the only battalion commander left that had landed in Normandy with the 3rd Battalion. So the thing about the 22nd to understand is the 3rd Battalion was Lanham's go-to battalion. basically if he was in a pinch or he needed to do something quick, he would keep the 3rd Battalion in the rear, and he would always throw them in as his kind of like his quick fix kind of thing. So right away you have 2 battalion commanders that are wounded, as well as many members of their staff. What's even crazier is at this time, as they're going up the fire break, the Hohenschneider fire break, which is right here, to the 5 points, just a little story about Vaquero Garcia, who will get the Medal of Honor in the 22nd, just to give you an idea of what he is like. So they're going up the fire break. They had 4 light tanks in support of them. The first tank hits the mine in the fire break. Second tank tries to get around that tank, they hit a mine. Third tank tries to go around through the woods, they get stuck in the mud. Now you got a roadblock. So the infantry moves off. B company, Garcia's company is on the right, A is on the left. Right away they hit machine gun fire and they're pinned down. Garcia and another Private Jeffries are both scouts for B Company, and each of them are armed with a BAR. So what they start doing on the right side of the fire break, they start playing a cat and mouse game with the machine gunner. One of the scouts lays down a base of fire, gets his attention, while the other one moves around. He sets, he puts down a base of fire. Now he's got their attention, and the other one moves around. And they keep doing this for a little while until an assault team of about 15 soldiers runs in and clears that machine gun nest. So one of the things, the reason why I'm bringing this up is it just shows you the tenacity that someone like Garcia had, and you'll see that later on how he got the Medal of Honor. So the 18th is another crazy day for the 22nd, and as they move off for their attack, there's an observer for the Germans across the Weserweg, which is here, and that's Road W, and they take a direct hit on their CP, taking out the entire command team, including the battalion commander. The only survivor is the executive officer and a signal NCO, and they're out checking the lines. So now the XO is in charge. Well, he's immediately a casualty. So they send up the commander from F Company. He's hit. They send up the commander from E Company. He takes over, and within 1 hour, there were 5 different officers within command of the 2nd Battalion. And that just shows you how crazy the artillery was, because the problem is as soon as they took over a position, these are positions that the Germans had previously, they knew where it was. So now they're just going to hit that position. And it made it even worse with all the tree bursts and everything else going on. So basically what the theme is here, you get like a day or 2 of actions going on for the 22nd, and then they need a day or 2 to stop. So the 19th, nothing happens, they reconsolidate their lines. They try to push again until about the 22nd and 23rd, they stop, and it's Turkey Day. So you gotta stop and have your turkey, right? So they keep trying to break through. What Lanham does is he gets tricky he tries to do surprise attacks, and this is when he puts in his ace in the hole, which is his 3rd Battalion, and you can see they try to go around to try to surprise the Germans, and it's successful. They break through a little bit, but they have to stop. The other problem is because the 12th Infantry Regiment got pulled from the division. This was a strike against Barton, so he had to go into the forest without all 3 of his regiments. Now, the 2nd Battalion, which is on the right flank, they have an open flank, and the Germans keep hitting and coming around this flank, causing a lot of casualties for them, and they have to stop constantly to clear out these areas. And that's one of the reasons why you get an advance, stop, get an advance, stop, and so on for the 22nd.
Was that the gap that I read about, that the 12th was sent to fill this gap between 8 and 22?
Yep, that's exactly it. It was really bad for the 2nd Battalion, and this is one of the reasons why they have the highest casualty rates in the regiment. So now they're pushing on to Grassau, and the biggest thing of all is the 25th. They get up to this fire break here, and he does it again. Lanham does the same trick again, and it almost works. 3rd Battalion goes around to the north to try to swing around, and they get to the edge of the forest. But the problem is they have to stop and wait for tank support, and there's a lot of miscommunication, and it takes the tanks a little while to get in. But when the infantry jumped off, they moved so quickly, and there was no artillery preparation, so that's why the Germans got surprised. He ran right through all the Germans, the 3rd Battalion ran right through all the Germans, and basically captured many of them, and they just didn't have a chance. They didn't know what was going on until they got to the edge of the forest. Waited for the tanks come up. 3 tanks get to the edge of the forest, and all 3 are knocked out by anti-tank fire. And the artillery starts coming in so heavy, the 3rd Battalion has to stop dead in their tracks. So they're stuck here now. So what they're doing further on, the 26th, nothing happens. They're reconsolidating their lines. And it's really on the 26th, what they try to do is they try to make one little push, and it's C Company of the 26th. So at the time, C Company is doing mine clearing, supporting the engineers with mine clearing on Road X right here. And what they have to do is they have to go in and get this patch of woods that are in front of Rossau. And so here's the patch of woods. We're going to go see this tomorrow. And then there's this field that no longer exists because now it's people's backyards. And it's about 150 yards, this field. And there's about grass in there about 3 feet high. C Company goes in, they use the grass for cover and whatever craters are in there. And they come over artillery fire. They get into a fight with the Germans in there, and they're able to push into the clump of woods and get the woods. For the Germans, this is really bad because they no longer have any more fallback points because now that's Grasau. That's all they have is the town itself and the buildings in the town. So they don't like this. They want these woods back, and they're going to go and counterattack. So this is what it looks like today. This is your field, what it looks like now, people's backyards, and this is what was the clump of woods. So C Company gets counterattacked. So machine gun comes down here, and they start firing. One tries to come around them, and they start firing, and they have another one here. So 6 soldiers from C Company react, and they come around to the right of this machine gun and take it out and capture it. But what ends up happening is the Germans get smart, they have tanks. So they have a Mark IV hidden in one of the houses over here about 75 yards from the woods, and it's firing on the woods from that side, causing a crossfire between these two. But what really puts the nail in the coffin for C Company is German infantry starts infiltrating around both sides of the woods, and they beat a hasty retreat to not get surrounded. So now they've lost the woods. So now it's up to B Company to get the woods, and enters PFC Macario Garcia. So his company attacks through that field. And as they're attacking, the first platoon goes in, which has 17 men left. But the artillery is so heavy, the platoon is actually wiped out. The only survivor of the platoon is the platoon leader, Lieutenant Murray. And the reason why he survived is he got forward so quickly leading his troops that the artillery missed him. And he took cover in one of the shell craters as well. So now it's up to another platoon to go in. They get chewed up from machine gun fire. And Macario Garcia's platoon is in there. And what happens is one soldier from his platoon tries to go to the right. Machine gun takes him out. Another soldier tries to go to the left. Machine gun takes him out. So Garcia sees a way to go down the slope of the hill, and he uses some of the smoke from the artillery as cover. And he gets around and takes out one of the machine gun nests by himself, single-handedly, and then eventually takes out a second one. While doing all this, when he went through the field, he was wounded in the shoulder from shrapnel. And to give you an idea of what happened, this is Tony Bizzaro, who was a platoon leader and later the company commander because all the officers are gone. It's only him and Murray left in B Company. And he says, I heard several grenades explode and saw Garcia advancing to the edge of the woods. In a few minutes, several reports from an M1 rifle were heard. Then Garcia emerged from the woods saying, God damn, I killed 3 Germans and knocked out that machine gun. No sooner had he said this when another machine gun opened from another section of the woods, and Garcia, though wounded, re-entered the woods, completely annihilated the machine gun crew of 3 and took 4 prisoners without assistance. This enabled the rest of the company to advance in the woods. From then on, they held on to the woods. And what Lanham does is he sends elements of E Company to support them, and they hold on to the woods and eventually attack and take Rossau. So to give you an idea about Garcia, he was actually born in Mexico, and he's the first soldier in the U.S. Army that is of Latino descent and is not even American that receives the medal. And even at the time of receiving the medal, he's not even an American citizen yet. So this is in August of '45, President Truman presenting him the medal. He migrated to America very young, to Sugar Land, Texas, and he worked as a ranch hand for most of his life, and that's probably one of the reasons why he was able to do some of the things he was able to do, because he lived such a hard, work-heavy life. He would receive his citizenship in 1947, and he died of a car accident. I believe it was a head-on collision, how he died, on Christmas Eve.
Oh, wow.
So these are some of the things that show the legacy of Garcia. So you see on the bottom right, that's Fire Station 20 in East Houston. They named a middle school after him in East Houston. When he left the Army, he stayed in the Army, went into the reserves, and attained the rank of Sergeant Major. So the Reserve Center in Houston is named in his honor, and there's also a park in East Houston named after him. And then this is him before he received the medal. He gets an award from LULAC, which is the League of United Latin American Citizens. So there's a story that in the late 40s, before he received his citizenship, and they're the reason he received his citizenship, because he went into a restaurant and they refused him service because of his descent. And because of that, there was an uproar within the community, and people, there was an outcry, protest, and all this stuff. And it was this organization that turned around and helped him get his citizenship in 47. And that's Garcia with his family. You see his youngest trying to take the medal from him. He's like, no way. Okay, 8th Infantry Regiment. So this is Colonel McKee, Richard McKee with his staff in September. This is one of those interesting officers that is kind of lost to history. And there was an article about him in the Army's journal, On Point. And basically, Colonel McKee was known to be a very good planner. So the reason why he got this job is because he was the Chief of Staff of 7th Corps and worked very closely with Collins, Lieutenant Joe Collins. Well, him and Lieutenant Joe Collins didn't get along very well. And the reason is backing up further in the early 40s, he was the G3, the Operations Training Officer for 3rd Army in Fort Sam Houston under Hodges. Hodges loved him. So when Hodges went to Europe, Hodges took him and some of the staff with him. And when they were planning for Normandy, they were coming up with the command for 7th Corps, and they said, well, you know, this guy Collins, he's good and all, but he's a young guy. And, you know, we want to keep him in the loop, so we're going to put our people with him. He's not going to pick who he wants for his staff. We're going to give him his staff. And that's how he got the Chief of Staff job. And he's also credited with a lot of the things that Collins is known for, like a lot of the planning for Operation Cobra, for one, that he got no credit for, that Collins got a lot of credit for. And because him and Collins didn't see eye and eye, they had to pull him from 7th Corps, and they gave him combat command, giving him the 8th Infantry Regiment, which he took in September. And this is him with his entire staff. So these are the objectives for the 8th Regiment. Kind of the same idea. Things to point out that you will see tomorrow is Hill 101, Hill 199, all those hills the Germans had forces on. The biggest one is Hill 280, and this is the area we'll talk about later with Mabry. And you have the L25, which is what it's called today, which is Road U. And that's also the Chevenuta-Duren Road. And this is an aerial view of Chevenuta. So this is where the 8th Infantry Regiment attacked from. And you can see at the very, very bottom, this hill, that's Hill 268. So there's a lot of very famous photos on this hill. We're going to go to this hill tomorrow. And I'll show you some of these photos. And I guarantee you most of you have seen these photos. And most of these photos are of I Company of the 8th Regiment moving into the line. But we'll talk more about that tomorrow. But what's great about this is you can really get an idea of the terrain that they're dealing with, the hills and woods and things like that. All right, so this is the initial attack on November 16th for the 8th Infantry Regiment. And that's the battalion commander for 2nd Battalion, Colonel Langdon Jackson. And basically what they did is they attacked in a column of battalions, 2nd leading, 1st following, and 3rd in the rear. You had, as you can see, F and G, and you can see how small the units are for the Germans here. And they're holding them off. So basically what you see of the red line, this is that example of barbed wire entanglements. What the Germans had there is they had a triple pyramid of concertina wire, and they said it was about 8 8 to 10 feet high above a man's head. In front of that wire was all kinds of shoe mines, and all that area was zeroed in by artillery and mortar fire. So on the first day, they're having a heck of a time. They can't blow a hole in the wire to get through. They can't get through the wire. They can't get tanks up. The Bangalore torpedoes that they're trying to use to blow the wire are all wet from the rain and mud, so none of them are going off. And guys are just stepping on mines, getting mortared and machine gunned. So this is an example of what the wire would have looked like. And take note of the stakes, because that's how they're going to get through this wire. And I'll explain that in the next slide. But many of the wire defenses involve things like this. And this is the one that was in front of 2nd Battalion. And these are just examples of the demolitions they tried to do. Here are your Bangalore torpedoes. You have your det cord, which is a detonating cord, which you could actually take that stuff and wrap it around the tree by itself and actually blow the tree or whatever it is, you wrap that around. And you use that with the Bangalore torpedoes. And then you have your blasting caps, which you need in order to set it off as like a primer. And that's just an example of troops trying to utilize a Bangalore torpedo. Okay, and now enters Lieutenant Bernard Ray. So the second day, so on the 16th, the attack fails, right? Jackson's calling, the battalion commander's calling McKee and saying, listen, this ain't working, I need a break, I can't do this. He's like, no, you're gonna make the attack again. So he has to do the attack again. They make the same exact attack, the same way, in the same fashion. And of course it fails. On the evening of the 16th, the company commanders are called to the battalion headquarters, which are not far from this area. They're actually near the rock quarry. And what happens is the G company commander was already a casualty. So the E company commander is leaving the battalion CP as the F company commander is coming in to get briefed. And as they pass each other, a mortar round comes in and takes them both out. Now all company commanders are a casualty within the 2nd Battalion, and it's up to the executive officers to take over. So this is, you see the same thing we saw in the 22nd area. Same type of thing where the officers are such a heavy casualty rate. So what happens is they're getting stopped again on the wire. And Ray's platoon is on the verge of being wiped out, and he takes matters into his own hands. And this is what happens. So this is George Devine, who at the time was the executive officer at G, but he becomes the company commander. He says, I went over to F Company and contacted Lieutenant Ray. Ray told me F Company also was held up by the wire, just as my outfit at G Company was. And he was going to try and blow it up himself with a Bangalore torpedo. I told him it would be suicide to attempt it alone, but he wouldn't listen to me. He said, we've got to get through that wire, and then started forward. What he did was he took some det cord to carry it quickly, wrapped it around him, put the blasting caps in his jacket pocket, and carried the torpedoes with him. As he was hooking up, as he got to the wire, which he made it to, unscathed, he was hooking up the torpedo when a mortar round landed near him, wounded him mortally, and thinking he was going to fail on his duties, he just went ahead with the det cord wrapped around him and hit the blasting caps and set it off, blowing himself up as well. He blew a hole in the wire, and luckily, later on that night, the A&P platoon came up from the headquarters company, and they also blew a second hole. And because of that, 1st Battalion is able to go through. Hold on a second. So this is just stuff about Ray, real quick. He's from New York. He's like me, another Long Island boy. And he received the medal posthumously, and it was basically his father went to Governor's Island in New York Harbor to receive the medal. His mother refused to go because she stated that he was too brave for his own good, and she did not want to be there to rekindle some of the bad feelings she had about losing him. And these are some things about Ray that they have. They named a health clinic after him and a cargo ship, and this is where he is buried, Veterans National Cemetery in Nassau County in Long Island, New York. But what's really interesting is here in Germany, in Freiburg near Frankfurt, was Ray Barracks. And that's where everyone who knows Elvis, where Elvis was stationed at Ray Barracks. So a little claim to fame there, huh?
So Elvis has left the barracks.
Yeah. So as I mentioned, because of what Ray did, 1st Battalion was able to come up and go through. When they came through, they get counterattacked, and then they're pulled back for the day, and that's it for the 17th. The 18th, which we'll talk more about when we get out there, C Company, where Pedro Cano was, they end up taking on the lead of the fight, and they go through the wire. What ends up happening is the Germans end up retreating. Because of what the 22nd did in the south and broke through, this exposed the flank of the Germans up here in this area. And rather than be outflanked, they pull back automatically, and that allows C Company and the rest of the 1st Battalion to go through. And what they do is they go up the fire break, and now they have tanks with them. And what they do is they follow the tanks and they walk in the tank treads to avoid the mines. So this is the clearing. I won't go too much into this now. I'll talk more about this tomorrow. But this is Captain Robert Moore, the commander of C Company, and that's Pedro's company commander. And they get into a fight in this place called the clearing, which they're able to clear the Germans out of there, and they take over this, but they're stuck in the trenches there for a couple days. And I'll just fast forward to Mabry so we can all go eat. So, George Mabry. So when 2nd Battalion was stopped at the wire, they had to pull the 2nd Battalion back to Bend, which was the assembly areas for the 8th, and where the 8th Regiment CP was. And so he refits, and between the 16th and 17th, those 2 days of trying to get through the wire, which they didn't, they lost a total of 200 men altogether. And he lost basically most of his officers. All his company commanders are gone, because now he just took over. The other battalion commander was relieved. And so, with Mabry being the executive officer, now he's the battalion commander. So now he needs to move out, and his orders are to find a way around the German positions. Get around the wire, but mostly find a way around these positions that are stopping 1st Battalion up there in the north. So what he does is he comes down the road here, and he gets down to this area in the draw, which is now all underwater, and he finds they run into a minefield, and they come under machine gun fire from the area around Hill 280. And the scouts out in front, which are in G Company, are stopped dead. They just stop. And most of these guys are new replacements that don't have a lot of experience. So what does Mabry do? He takes the lead, runs up to the front, and tries to get his battalion moving, rather than to stop and be stuck there. So they move down, they find a minefield in one area, and he tries to get around it around the base of Hill 280, but finds an even larger minefield. And all of a sudden, he's taking casualties from this minefield. Medics are running in to render aid. They're taking casualties from mines. So he says, everyone stop, no one goes into the minefield. And what he does is he goes back up over here and recontours, does a reconnaissance of the area over here where he initially went. And what he does is he sees a light coating of snow that kind of outlines the mines. And he's able to figure out where the mines are, and he goes through with the bayonet and finds the mines and things like that. Cuts the wire, and he's doing all this under machine gun fire. But luckily, it's not a lot of machine gun fire, and for them being in the draw, it's making it hard for the machine gun to really hit anything. So they get through, and as he's running through this area, through the draw, for one, the Germans are also, most of the Germans are distracted from 3rd Battalion that are down in here making an attack. So that's taking away attention from him, which is a good thing for Mabry. But at the same time, he takes fire from bunkers on a hill. He runs up the hill, he's being followed by G Company, and he goes in there, and Germans come at him. First German he hits with a rifle butt to the face, next German he bayonets, and before he knows it, he's getting mobbed by Germans until G Company comes in and helps him out. And long story short, he's able to clear through that. He sends G Company up this dry riverbed near Hill 101. They get stopped by Hill 101. There's a lot of machine gun fire there. And it's so steep in that area, the Germans are actually rolling grenades down the hill into the riverbed on some of these guys. He tries to get around that and sends E and F Company around the left, to swing around the left. And that's when they run into more defenses from Hill 101 in that trench area I mentioned to you before. So by this time, it's getting very dark. It's about 1700, and he has to stop the attack. He pulls back a little bit to the draw in this area, just in front of Hill 101, and he puts his battalion in a 360 defense and stays there for the night. And from then on in, they're basically trying to find a way to get out of this area. And what McKee does, well, I'll go to this first, and this is why he did what he did. And this is from an interview I found of his, a newspaper article. And what he says is, when I took command of the battalion, we'd lost 136 men killed or wounded in 24 hours of fighting. My company commanders were killed, morale was low, it was a pretty tough situation. Somebody had to take drastic action, and it had to be me. And then this is Mabry getting the Medal of Honor from President Truman. And eventually he retires as a Major General in 1975. And these are some things about Mabry for his legacy. And what's really cool is one of the reasons why I enjoy 4th Division history and why it's close to my heart is because my wife and I were both stationed at Fort Carson before here. And this was a cool thing that they had just made, the Mabry Mile. And they had just built it when we were there, and it's rough. I'll say that. It's a good time. So they try to break out of the area. What happens is the clearing, the area on the other side of the road from the clearing, 1st Battalion is getting stopped, and McKee comes up with the idea, kind of like Lanham was doing, to do a feint. And what he does is he has 2nd Battalion in the position where they are to make a fake attack and put fire on Hill 101. And they actually use smoke and everything to do this. And it takes attention away from 1st and 3rd Battalions, and they're able to get around and break out. So, long story short, 1st Battalion goes up the fire break there to the north. They go to what is known as Jaeger House, which there's an old monastery in that area, and they get into a hard fight in that area. 3rd Battalion cuts across this way, and they have a fight in the triangle, and they clear that area out. And eventually, 2nd Battalion is going to come back around through the same area as well, and they're going to come up the Renvig, and they're going to fight their way through there to get to a hill at the end of that fire break known as Hill 371. And they're going to stay there for a couple days until the end of November. So this is kind of what that fight looks like. You can see where 2nd Battalion is, where Mabry is, at the end of the Renvig, where 1st and 2nd Battalions went. And the 22nd was a day of gains, they said, for the 8th Regiment. And even the 3rd Battalion, after they cleared the triangle, they advanced about 2,000 yards to high ground, stopped and refitted themselves and got organized and things like that. And then this is what the area looks like in the beginning of December. And then you can see where 1st Battalion is of the 8th. That's where Pedro Cano did his thing. And we'll talk about that tomorrow with Stephen. And just a couple stats. Why this all happened? What were the problems? So things like poor visibility. It's hard to see in the woods, the weather, the terrain. You know, like I said, defender's paradise, right? So it gave, all this stuff gave advantages to the defenders. 30 guys holding off an entire battalion of about a couple hundred GIs. You had insufficient troops, deterioration of attacking forces. So all this combat experience you had going into the forest is now gone by this time. And you have these brand new replacements, even brand new officers, and these guys are on the, I mean, call it on the job training, but yeah, they're learning on the fly how to operate in these areas. The early commitment of the 12th Infantry Regiment was a real detriment to the 4th Division, and it made things very, very difficult for the advancement, especially the 22nd Regiment and its 2nd Battalion. And it's one of the reasons why they took such heavy casualties with the Germans flanking them and things like that. And then reaching the edge of the forest, the major objectives of the Roer and Rhine Rivers was never really reached by the 4th Division. So they got to the edge of the forest because their combat power is gone, and they're replaced eventually in early December by the 83rd Division. So it's the 22nd gets relieved first on the 4th, then the 12th, and then the 8th is there until the 11th, and then they're all pulled back to Luxembourg where the 83rd was. And then this is just a couple stats on the casualty figures for the 4th Division. So it gives you an idea. You know, what's interesting about this is the 22nd has the highest, and one thing I like to think of is the reason for this is you look at the area they're in. The area that the 22nd fought in was very, very, very remote. There was no major roadways. You had a couple fire breaks. But one of the things Lanham told his troops was stay away from the fire breaks, attack through the forest to surprise the enemy. It was successful at first, but towards the end, the Germans knew where they were all the time, and they were able to hit them with artillery fire, and it made it very difficult for the 22nd. You see the 8th Regiment has the lowest of all, but that's mainly because they had better access to roadways and things like that for their attacking area. And just some references from what I used for my research. Questions? Anybody? Bueller? Anybody?
Sorry, can you switch back to the area you call the triangle
Yes.
on the map? Do you know if there was any artillery positioned?
Artillery.
Not in that area, they were further back. So the troops that were here were from 2nd Company of the Fusilier Battalion from the 275th. So you had about, I think, 40 or 50 guys in there, somewhere around there. But
Because I know there were foxholes and branches and some circular dig outs.
so we're gonna go there tomorrow, and that's actually, right here, is the Renvik parking lot, for any of you who have been there before. And if you go in that little patch of woods, it's loaded with really nice, pristine foxholes still. And all these foxholes would have been log covered.
So thank you.
Yeah, any other questions? All right, hey, let's go eat.